Good afternoon, everyone. I'm May and Williamine, your discussant at this moment. Now, let's proceed to my topic. Under the Chapter 21, we have Section 3, Japan and the Pacific. The Allied Occupation. From 1945 to 1952, Japan was an occupied country. Its lands held and controlled by Allied military forces. An Allied administration under the command of United States General Douglas MacArthur governed Japan. As commander of the occupation administration, MacArthur was responsible for destroying the Japanese war machine, trying Japanese civilian and military officials charged with war crimes, and laying the foundations of post-war Japanese society. Under MacArthur's firm direction, Japanese society was remodeled along Western lines. A new constitution renounced war as a national policy. Japan agreed to maintain armed forces at levels that were only sufficient for self-defense. The constitution also established a parliamentary system, reduced the power of the emperor, who was forced to announce that he was not a god, guaranteed basic civil and political rights, and gave women the right to vote. On September 8, 1951, the United States and other former World War II allies, but not the Soviet Union, signed a peace treaty restoring Japanese independence. On the same day, Japan and the United States signed a defensive alliance in which the Japanese agreed that the United States could maintain military bases in Japan. The Japanese Miracle. In August 1945, Japan was in ruin and its land occupied by a foreign army. Half a century later, Japan was the second greatest industrial power in the world. Japan's rapid emergence as an economic giant has often been described as the Japanese miracle. Japanese had made a dramatic recovery from the war. To understand this phenomenon fully, we must examine not just the economy but also the changes that have occurred in Japanese society, politics, and government. Japan's new constitution embodied the principles of universal suffrage and balance of power among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. These principles have held firm. Japan today is a stable democratic society. At the same time, the current Japanese political system retains some of Japan's 19th century political system under the Meiji. An example involves the distribution of political power. Japan has a multi-party system with two major parties, the Liberal Democrats and the Socialists. In practice, however, the Liberal Democrats have dominated the government. At one point, they remained in office for 30 years. During this period, decisions on key issues such as who should become prime minister were decided by a small group within the party. A democratic change, however, did occur in 1993, when the Liberal Democrats were defeated on charges of government corruption. Hirohito Sakawa was elected prime minister and promised to clean up the political system. The central government plays an active role in the economy. It establishes price and wage policies and subsidizes vital industries. This government role in the economy is widely accepted in Japan. Indeed, it is often cited as a key reason for the efficiency of Japanese industry and the emergence of country as an industrial giant. Japan's economic system has been described as a state capitalism.
Some problems remain, however. Two recent prime ministers have been forced to resign over improper financial dealings with business associates. Critics at home and abroad have charged the owing government policies. The textbooks used in Japanese schools do not adequately discuss the crimes committed by the Japanese government and armed forces during World War II. The economy during their occupation of Japan, Allied officials had planned to dismantle the large business conglomeration known as the Zaibatsu. With the rise of the Cold War, however, the policy was scaled back. Only the 19th largest companies were affected. In addition, the new policy did not keep Japanese companies from forming loose ties with each other, which basically gave rise to other Zaibatsu system. The The occupation administration had more success with its land reform program. Half of the population lived on farms, and half of all farmers were tenants of large landowners. Under the reform program, lands were sold on easy credit terms to the tenants. The reform program created a strong class of independent farmers. At the end of the Allied occupation in 1952, the Japanese gross national product was one-third that of Great Britain or France. In 2000, it was larger than both put together and roughly half that of the United States. Japan is the greatest exporting nation in the world. Its per capita income equals or surpasses that of most Western states. What explains the Japanese success? Some analysts point to cultural factors. The Japanese are group-oriented and find it easy to cooperate with one another. Hardworking and frugal, they are more inclined to save than to buy. This boosts the savings rate and labor productivity. The labor force is highly skilled. In addition, the Japanese people share common values and respond in similar ways to the challenges of the modern world. Other analysts have cited more practical reasons for the Japanese economic success. For example, because its industries were destroyed in World War II, Japan was forced to build entirely new modern factories. Japanese workers spend a substantially longer period of time at their jobs than the workers in other advanced societies. Corporations reward innovation and maintain good management-labor relations. Finally, some experts contend that Japan uses unfair trade practices, that it dumps goods at prices below cost to break into a foreign market and restricts import from other countries. Social challenges. During the occupation, Allied planners thought they could eliminate the aggressiveness that had characterized Japanese behavior before and during the war. A new educational system removed all references to patriotism and loyalty to the emperor. At the same time, it stressed individualism. Women were given the right to vote and were encouraged to enter politics. Efforts to remake Japanese behavior to law were only partly successful. Many of the distinctive characteristics of traditional Japanese society have persisted in the present day. Although in altered form, emphasis on the work ethic, for example, remains strong. The tradition of hard work is stressed in the educational system. The subordinate role of women, Japanese society has not been entirely eliminated. Women are now legally protected against discrimination in employment, yet very few have reached senior levels in business, education, or politics. Japan has had no female prime minister and few female cabinet ministers. Women now make more than 40% of the workforce, but most are in retail or service occupations. Their average salary is only about 60% that of males. Culture. After Japanese defeat in World War II, many of the writers who had been active before the war resurfaced. However, their writing was now more sober. This last generation described its anguish and facing despair. Several writers committed suicide. For them, the fate was made worse by fear of the Americanization of post-war Japan. Since the 1970s, increasing wealth and a higher literacy rate have led to a massive outpouring of books. In 1975, Japan already produced twice as much fiction as the United States. This trend continued into the 1990s. Much of this new literature deals with the common concerns of all the wealthy industrialized nations. Current Japanese authors were raised in the crowded cities of post-war Japan, where they soak up movies, televisions, and rock music. These writers speak the universal language of today's world. Haruki Murakami is one of Japan's most popular authors today. He was one of the first to discard the somber style of the earlier post-war period and to speak the contemporary language. A Wild Ship Chase, published in 1982, is an excellent example of his gripping yet humorous writing. The Asian tigers. A number of Asian nations have imitated Japan in creating successful industrial societies. Sometimes called the Asian tigers, they are South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Along with Japan, they have become economic powerhouses. South Korea. In 1953, the Korean Peninsula was exhausted from 3 years of bitter war. Two heavily armed countries now face each other across the 38th parallel. North of this line was the People's Republic of Korea.
Under the dictatorial rule of communist leader Kim Il-sung, the South was the Republic of Korea. Under the dictatorial President Syngman Rhee. After several years of harsh rule and government corruption in South Korea, demonstrations broke out in the capital city of Seoul in the spring of 1960. Rhee was forced to retire. A coup d'etat in 1961 put General Chung Hee-park in power 2 years later. Park was elected president and began to strengthen the South Korean economy with land reform and the promotion of free market policies. South Korea gradually emerged as a major industrial power in East Asia. The key areas of industrial development were chemicals, textiles, and shipbuilding. By the 1980s, South Korea was moving into automobile production. The largest Korean corporations are Samsung, Daewoo, and Hyundai. Like many other countries in the region, South Korea was slow to develop democratic principles. Park ruled by autocratic means and suppressed protests. However, opposition to military rule began to develop in the growth of a middle class. Students and city dwellers demonstrated against government policies. Democracy finally came in the 1990s. Elections held during an economic crisis in 1997 brought the reformer Kim Tae-jung to the presidency. Taiwan, the other China. After they were defeated by the communists and forced to retreat to Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek and his followers established a capital at Taipei. The government continued to call itself the Republic of China. Chiang Kai-shek government maintained that it was the legitimate government of all the Chinese people and would eventually return in triumph to the mainland. At the same time, however, the communist government on the mainland claimed to rule all of China, including Taiwan. Protection by American military forces enabled the new regime to concentrate on economic growth without worrying about a communist invasion. Making good use of foreign aid and the efforts of its own energetic people, the Republic of China built a modern industrial society. A land reform program which put farmland in the hands of peasants doubled food production in Taiwan. With government help, local manufacturing and commerce expanded. During the 1960s and 1970s, industrial growth averaged well over 10% a year. By 2000, over three-quarters of the population live in the urban areas. Prosperity, however, did not at first lead to democracy. Under Chiang Kai-shek, the government ruled by emergency decree and refused to allow the formation of new political parties. After the death of Qing in 1975, the Republic of China slowly began to evolve toward a more representative form of government. By 2000, free election had enabled opposition parties to win control of the presidency and the legislature. A major issue for Taiwan is whether it will become an independent state or will be united with mainland China. The United States supports self-determination for the people of Taiwan and believes that any final decision of Taiwan's future must be made by peaceful means. Meanwhile, the People's Republic of China on the mainland remains committed to eventual unification. Singapore and Hong Kong. Singapore, once a British colony and briefly a part of the state of Malaysia, is now an independent state under the leadership of Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. Singapore developed an industrial economy based on shipbuildings, oil refineries, and electronics. Singapore has also become the banking center of the region. In Singapore, an authoritarian political system has created a stable environment for economic growth. The Prime Minister once stated that the Western model of democracy was not appropriate for Singapore. Its citizens, however, are beginning to demand more political freedoms. Like Singapore, Hong Kong became an industrial powerhouse with standards of living well above the level of its neighbors. For over 150 years, Hong Kong was under British rule. In 1997, however, Great Britain returned control of Hong Kong to mainland China. China, in return, promised that for the next 50 years, the people of Hong Kong would live under a capitalist system and be self-governing. The shape of Hong Kong's futures remain uncertain. Australia and New Zealand. Both Australia and the country of New Zealand, located to the south and east of Australia, have identified themselves culturally and politically with Europe rather than with their Asian neighbors. Their political institutions and values are derived from European models, and their economies resemble those of the industrialized countries of the world. Both are members of the British Commonwealth. Both are also part of the United States-led ANZUS Defensive Alliance, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. In recent years, however, trends have been drawing both states closer to Asia. First, immigration from East and Southeast Asia has increased rapidly. More than one half of current immigrants into Australia come from East Asia. Second, trade relations with Asia are increasing rapidly. About 60% of Australia's export markets today are in East Asia. Asian trade with New Zealand is also on the increase. Whether Australia and New Zealand will ever become an integral part of the Asia-Pacific region is uncertain, since the majority of the population in both Australia and New Zealand has European origins. Cultural differences often hinder mutual understanding between the two countries and their Asian neighbors. And now, let's proceed to Chapter 22, Challenges and Hopes for the Future. A Time for Heroes. On September 11, 2001, international territories hijacked four commercial airplanes, two of which were used to destroy the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. Thousands of people died in the attack when first one tower and then the other collapsed. Many of those who died were firefighters, police officers, and other rescue workers who rushed into the buildings to help people to safety. In the days following the attack, countless tales of imaginable slavery emerged. Two office workers carried a disabled woman down 68 floors to safety. Peter Gansey, a 33-year-old veteran of the New York City Fire Department, survived the collapse of the first tower but died trying to evacuate people from the second tower. Father Michael Judge, the fire department chaplain, removed his helmet to give last rites to a dying firefighter but died himself when he was hit by debris. One fighter, as he climbed toward the flames, stopped to give a fleeing woman a bottle of water. She escaped, but he did not. George Howard, a Port Authority officer, raced to help people even though it was his day off, and died in effort. In an address to the American nation, President George W. Bush said that he would carry Howard's badge as a reminder of the horrors of terrorism. For freedom and fear are at war. The advance of human freedom, the great achievement of our time, and the great hope of every time, now depends on us. He will not falter and he will not fail. And that's all for today. Thanks for listening.